All right, let's see how we proceed. I think last time Joyce, remind me where we stopped last time, if you remember. Joyce, are we together? Please, can you have your phone down? Nice. I think in our class yesterday, somewhere we agreed the phones will be kept at the corner, as long as people don't steal. And that's what we are going to do. Time for TikTok should be time for TikTok. So, Joyce, where did we stop? Where did we stop last time we met? Or what were you looking at when we met last time? I'm talking to you. You can't remember? Huh? To show that you have not even tried to go through your notes since last time we met. Tell me where we are and what we are looking at. Ariane, tell us where we are. Nobody remembers anything. You must get me where we stopped and the topic that we're dealing with now. So, what does this mean? That I'm talking to myself when we're here. Yeah, you can't remember what we covered just last week, 7 days ago. Can you remember what we covered last July? Okay. Nothing. So what you are telling me is that you just sit here and I sit here and nothing happens. Right? You sit here, I sit here, nothing happens. That's what it means, eh? Okay. Last time when we met, we were looking at the processes that are involved in policy formulation. That's what we are looking at. We are looking at processes that lead to policy formulation. And I said that, but unfortunately, we cannot beam. Maybe now we can. You think so? No. We can break the machine here. So I said that issues of policy formulation are a process which must be acceptable for addressing an identified need requiring government intervention. Those are things that we did look at. And that there are two types that we focus on when we are looking at issues of policy formulation. One, something which is going to be effective. Two, one which is going to be acceptable. And I said an effective policy is that one which observes all the required processes involved in coming up with a policy. In other words, is the information about why you want to establish or develop a policy available. Policies are established from evidence. There must be evidence why a policy must be established. And evidence depends or relies highly on data, which is reliable, which is factual. And also, an effective policy is one that should be able to attract stakeholders who should be part of the formulation processes, right? And also that it must follow all stages of policy formulation. This is what we call a policy, an effective policy formulation process. Now, an acceptable policy formulation process is the one which gives you an indication that the policy being formulated will be likely to be accepted, right? By who? By authorities and also by the targets. In other words, the citizens who are going to be beneficiaries of that particular policy. So here, you find that when you come up with a policy, you must really be, you must be very, very clear to ensure that whatever you come up with is going to be, one, effective to meet the needs of the citizens, and secondly, must be accepted by both the powers that be and also by people who are going to be the beneficiaries of that policy. What you must not forget is that policy formulation as a process has a cost attached to it. So you must know whether or not you have the resources for your policy formulation. That's the first thing. The second thing is that policy formulation and implementation, all these are cost issues. So you must make sure that you're going to have resources available to implement that particular policy. Others can have a policy without any implementation at all because you have no resources to do that. We shall look at those and see how they actually apply to what we are looking at. So here, you need to, in first process, to look at who are your stakeholders, how do you engage your stakeholders, and also the issue of the technicality of the policy. Who are the technical persons or personnel that can champion the formulation of that particular policy? It's not anybody who can just come around and say, here is a policy, and we go along with that one. Now, in policy analysis, I said we are looking at the post, right? Ex and post, pre and post, right? Situations. Pre-policy analysis is a situation, a process where you look at the feasibility of your coming up with a policy by getting the evidence, identifying the needs, and also coming up with strategies through which you can address those needs of the people on the ground. That's the pre. The post is an evaluation where you are looking back at your policy, you are looking back at the goal for which that policy intended to achieve, and also looking at the objectives that you are supposed to implement, and also you are looking at your outcomes. This is a post policy analysis. So when we talk about policy analysis, we're talking about two things. Before you formulate a policy, you must analyze. Before you formulate, you must analyze. After you formulate, implement, you must evaluate to check whether you have achieved what you are supposed to achieve or not. So these are the two sides of a policy. I think you had an examination question in that area. I remember very well. Right. And also here we looked at the processes. When we talk about a process is a sequence or stages of events that lead to the actual policy formulation. And there are quite a number of these. What we call the one, you must identify the actual problem. Why do you come up with a policy? There must be a problem. You cannot just wake up and say, today we're going to have a policy where we want to kill everybody who is shot. Right? There must be a reason why you want to kill all people who are shot as a policy. So something like that. So you must identify a problem, and that problem must be genuine. And if it is genuine, must meet two criteria. One, is it going to be effective, as I earlier mentioned on? And second, is it going to be acceptable, both by the powers that be, and also secondly, by the beneficiaries of that particular policy. So you have to look at all these things around here. Now, after that, you look at what we call the stakeholder analysis. You must look for people who, in your view, from your initial assessment, think will benefit from the policy, or those that you think will support that policy, including those that are going to fund that particular policy. All these are stakeholders. So stakeholders are a critical part. Stakeholder analysis or identification are a critical part of policy formulation, because you can formulate the policy where nobody is going to participate. So it is going to be an effective policy. So I have to look at those. Now the thirdly, which I did mention earlier on as our first step, the problem analysis. So identification, problem analysis, you can come to stakeholder analysis as well. That's fine. Then you look at what I call the throughput analysis. Last time I mentioned about the throughput analysis. What is throughput analysis? Joyce? Are we together? Unataka kuchiliza usiku. Why are you dozing now at 10 o'clock? So unalemba gale? Don't surprise me like somewhere in Europe, Azerbaijan guy, something like that. They are supposed to have elections yesterday for the presidents and other people, right? So instead of having the elections yesterday, the electoral commission released the results with the president and everybody around. So we say, what happened? Right? So those are the things. Okay, that's fine. If you have the notes, you are following, that's fine. So what is step number 4? From your notes. Yes. You set the agenda, you move on to form the population, legitimization, implementation, and evaluation. So you actually have the notes around. I've just had to run through for those who are not around here. Now, the other issue you would be looking at is probably, okay, let's look at the issues of how you start off, and also the processes that we are going to be looking at. There's an issue of the interactiveness of the process, where you are going to involve different players and also different stakeholders. Any effective policy requires or demands that you consult at every level of your policy formulation. And even before it gets into the legitimization processes, make sure that the people who are going to be beneficiaries, that is the public or the citizens, must be aware of what you are trying to do. And probably there will be a point where they will try to give you inputs into that particular policy. Unfortunately, though, is that most policies, I think, are crafted by central government without any input from the people on the ground. That's why, in most cases, you can go to any village now, mention about any policy, maybe nobody knows about it. Even if you go to a primary school and meet teachers and ask about some policy, they may not even know, right? Even in their own policy, education policy, they may not even know what is happening to them. So it is important that you have your activity to map out who your stakeholders are going to be, and also other players around that. And I mentioned about the issues of the throughput analysis. A throughput analysis, I think I've been looking at this, and we have discussed this over and over again, is a situation where you must create a picture or visualize about what may happen, which you never planned would happen, right? That is a throughput. So something that you never planned, but is likely to come out. And a throughput can have two effects on your policy. It can influence the success of the policy sometimes, or it can actually bring about the actual failure of that particular policy if the output is against what your objectives are and also what your goal that you intended to achieve is supposed to be. So you need to be very aware of that. I think I gave you an example long time ago. I like to give that example. You want to save girls from early marriages, right? Give them a school where they can go. Girls only. But they are walking every day, 20 kilometers to that school. Out of the 200 you want to protect, 70 get pregnant in the process. That is a throughput. In other words, when you're planning, you never thought that they can get pregnant. What you wanted to do was protect them from early marriage, right? So, if you want to protect them from early marriage, you actually still get married and get pregnant. Now you want to protect them from early marriage, they still get pregnant. That's a throughput. How do you address that type of throughput? How do you design a policy that is going to protect girls from both these occurrences, right? So create a boarding space where they cannot be moving around every day over 20 kilometers to avoid them meeting men who may prowl on them and something like that. So that is it. So that is an example of a throughput and how you can address that throughput by redesigning your policy to address an issue which has just occasioned out of what you planned. In other ways, one, the type of throughput analysis can be pre and can be post. Marembo, what would that be like? If I say, if you're designing your policy to address an issue of a throughput, how can you address the pre and post throughput issue in your policy design? Simple. What do you do? Anybody? It's not only her. You see, so all these things will come in when you are looking at the issues of assessment, when you're doing your assessment, right? For policy formulation, your assessment, and for your policy implementation assessment. This is where you can get your issues on how you can address issues like those. After, this thing is going to kick us, eh? Yeah, after implementation, and you have these results which you never intended to achieve, that is where your policy analysis comes in, to redesign the policy to address that which has occasioned. And as you are designing, you must look at the probability of certain things happening, which may affect your policy implementation. So these are the ways in which you can actually address some of these issues around. Okay, let's move on quickly. And she talked about agenda setting. Yes, that is where you are trying to come up with what you want to do and how you are going to move forward by realizing or looking at issues that must be addressed. And this is where you look at the issues around an identified problem and also the decisions that you are going to make about those issues. And here, in most cases, this is a pre-type of approach to policy formulation. Things that you do before you start doing your policy formulation. Okay, so the agenda setting is quite critical because it gives you the goal. Of course, the agenda will be based on the goal that you have. Don't forget that when we started looking at policy analysis, I gave you a framework through which you can see your processes in the policy formulation. You must have a vision, right? And you have a mission. You have a goal, you have objectives, right? And from objectives, then you have now those activities coming around what you do. That is how you look at your policy formulation. And your policy analysis, we still look at the same goal, vision, mission, goal, and your objectives. So that when you start formulating the policy, these things give you the guidance, something like that, right? It looks like how you do your research work, for example. You have your, whatever, you have your topic you are trying to look at, right? That topic you are looking at, in terms of policy, that's the problem. That's why I have a problem statement. I hope you remember that. Assuming you are writing some of these things. Are you? Or these are new things around. Are you? You think so? How far have you gone? Joyce, how far have you gone? 23rd October. Okay, good. Yeah, so you can see that in your research, whatever you are doing, right, it's almost like the way you do to, you look at how you can design and formulate a policy. You have a problem, right? And that problem gives you a broader objective, which you can turn it into a goal, right? So you have a broader goal, then you have really main objectives that you want. This is how you do with your research. Then you come to your specific objectives, which give you the actual activities that you are going to do, right? So your research questions, you are trying to assess, to look at how and what you are going to be looking at and how you are going to address those particular issues, which come as research questions to interrogate your specific objective. And in policies too, this is how we look at it, right? So in your pre-policy formulation or pre-policy analysis, we look at that issue as well. And if the post, also look at the way it is, but after it has been done. Then you're looking at what are the results, what are the outcomes, have we been able to achieve what we intended to do, and has our goal been achieved? If yes, how about our vision, right? So we have policy formulation. I just mentioned about the objectives and all sorts of things. Now you also look at the instruments. How do you formulate a policy, right? Same. How the instruments, what would this be in your research field to refer this to your research work? What would it be? What would it be? You have everything around. Now you want to start coming up with your policy. You are looking at the objectives, that's fine. And you're now looking at your instruments. What would these things be? Methodology, right? That's why you are looking at what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? All sorts of things. What are the costs? What will be the impact? What will be all those things, right? And that is where you're looking at your research methodology, things like those, right? Those are the instruments. And even in policy too, we look at those instruments. How am I going to carry out this activity? How, and several other issues which are available. That's why at that level, we also you can also carry out your, what you call the SWOT analysis, right? SWOT analysis, or if you want to do, you can do the PESTEL analysis, depending on the type of policy that you are going to do. If it is an economic policy, it's a business-like policy, it's a marketing policy, you would use a PESTEL. I think you have come across that, right? PESTEL, anybody PESTEL analysis? PESTEL analysis? Nobody? Anybody? SWOT analysis? Okay? All right. So, depending on what you want to do, what I'm trying to do to put around here, the PESTEL analysis is, I said, depending on the type of policy you're going to do, you can do your SWOT analysis, which we are all familiar with, or you can do the PESTEL analysis. These two will depend on what you want to do, right? Now, let's start. You said yes, you have come across the PESTEL, right? You have, eh? So take us through. Huh? How do you know something that you don't remember? So there are two things. Either you know it or you don't know it. Which one? You know it or you don't know it? If you know it, you must remember. That's why you have a memory. Okay, political then. Economic. What? Okay. Simple. This is a first step. So even in a policy, if you want to look at your SWOT and this one here, you can actually apply these things, right? To understand the policy that you are developing, what will be the legal implications, right? As we proceed, we shall see. Policies and the legal instruments, they are a sister and a brother, right? And the issues of, if we have this policy around, what will be the technological implications of that particular policy? And so, the environmental issue, for example, right? We want to have Chikangawa forest so that we can make paper around. That was the policy why we had Chikangawa, right? So somebody came in, two things played games with that policy to produce our own paper and other paper products around here. Somebody came in, very, very awkwardly, used the political issue, right? And used the environmental to justify the political, whatever it is. And also, this one was already there. This one was already there. Now, this one I think was already there, no problem. But you are talking of a Chikangawa of the long time ago, right? And it was politically, those years were a bit serious. Malawi as a polarized type of country where we look at three different small countries around, the north, central, and the south. This is how Malawi looks like. Small country into small countries. Small countries around. So politically, because the center of power was in the central region, they didn't want this massive project to be up in the north as a smaller entity within it, right? So it was more political. It's not necessary. But the Chikangawa is there, that's fine. And environmental. Where are they going to throw the waste? They'll throw it into Lake Malawi and also, so they pollute Lake Malawi is a good freshwater lake and all sorts of things. So stop that one. The economic, whatever it is, was not even there. They didn't consider about the economic benefits, right? They looked more at the political and justified their decision by the environmental. We are going to spoil the environment to the north and the lake is good and all sorts of things. And the legal said, yeah, legally, we must protect the environment or something like that. So you can see how these things can work and affect the policy, right? So those ones who started with this policy never looked at these issues coming out because all policies are political in nature, right? That's why the pastel becomes necessary for you to also look at and see how it can help. So it is quite important to look at that as well. And also, at that point, then we move on to look at, once the policy has been created, so you have designed it, it must be adopted. And this is also where you are following a lot of processes in along the way. How do you get the policy going on? I think I did demonstrate last time how policies actually are. I know you are not here. You are not there last week. You are not there. So the two of you were there. Why I always give you the question about politics and policies as bedfellows is because of the nature of how these policies get formulated and also the nature of how these things are dealt with. First and foremost, I think I started by trying to look at what we call government, right? Government has three arms, which I put here. I think Joyce will help us now from here. George? Legislature and the judiciary. This is what we call government. right? These three arms are independent of each other, but they are mutually reinforcing, right? They are independent, but they usually reinforce each other, the executive, legislature, and the judiciary. Here it is the parliament, here you have the courts and the judges, and here you have the presidency. Right, this is what it is. This is the arrangement which is there. Now, why we talk about policy, and if we talk about public policy, and our focus mostly now is on public policy. All public policies are government policies, right? Now, if they are government policies here, it means they are also answerable to these here, right? Simple and straightforward. Now, the level of adoption of a policy, we must look at the real structure of government at technical level is the executive here, which brings it the OPC. That's what we should. That's the line of how you understand how the civil service, whatever it is. So I find that people in here, while they belong to these different pieces, sometimes they still come under the executive, because that's the topmost, where even things that are agreed down here, they go back to the executive, right? When you want to get the judges, it is the executive which appoints them, right? Things like those. So here, you find that here at the OPC, we are talking about the office of the presidency. So you have the president here, below the president, you have the minister. So you find that the minister here is part of that arrangement. And here, you have the guy called the chief secretary, I think. Very powerful guy. This is a guy who can go to the president even without notice. Just go there, I'm around something issue or something like that. And from here, you have what's called the principal secretary, right? These are administrative executive directors of ministries, both administratively. So here they do also administrative and professional liaisons around. Below these ones, then you have the directors now of all those sectors. When you have these directors of these sectors here, down here, then you have everybody around up to the district level. Now, the issue of policy formulation we're going to be looking at, and we're looking at, and also the one which we're going to be looking at when we move on quickly from here, is that you find that for the policies which can come straight from up here down, right? Executive declarations, for example, can come from the president. I want this and this. It becomes a policy. It will come down from here to here to here to here. It becomes a policy. The responsibility of this guy who is a technician is to craft and write that directive into a policy document, right? How to come up with this directive. What is the vision? What will be the mission? What is the goal, right? And from the goal, what will be our objectives and something like that, right? Tomorrow, I want everybody to benefit from free primary education. That's fine. It came from up here, down to the director in the Ministry of Education. Has to come up with a policy, written policy, right? So to look at all those things around. Now, alternatively, issues of how we get a policy is where we get evidence from the citizens on the ground. As a director, you get reports. You can see that a particular issue or event is occurring over and over across the board. It tells you that there's a problem which requires attention by government. You can come up with a policy around. And from here, now once you do it, at the stage where we are on adoption, we're looking at, once you create your policy here, how does it become part of the public policy? And when it becomes part of the public policy, how does it fit into these people here? How does it fit into these people here, right? And for it to be adopted, these guys must be satisfied. These guys must be satisfied. But the final guy to say yes will be the guy here, who actually is supposed even to sign that yes, indeed, this is a policy and we need to adopt it and something like that. So there are all these processes around. And here, it means the policy, there are so many small stages around here. The consultations, you go to the cabinet, you go to the cabinet committees, parliamentary committees, to cabinet and all sorts of things. Once a cabinet approves, and cabinet is up here, right? It's the ministers and the president. When we talk about cabinet, it's the minister and the president. And when there is an issue of policy, it will be the minister, the president, the minister and the president, the PS and the director. Right. This is how you get to know, you get into the State House, because the office of the president, when you have your policy to be presented, you have to be there to justify why you think we need to have this policy in Malawi. They're asking you, ministers will ask you, why? Why do we need this policy? And as I said last time, all policies talk to each other at every point, right? So Minister for Finance will ask you, why do we need this policy? He's looking at the finance factor. Do we have resources to implement this? Do we have resources to do this or something? Somebody from education will ask, and all sorts of things. In the end, when there's consensus, then that policy becomes, gets adopted, right? Once it is adopted, it now go back to legislature, whatever it is, all sorts of things. In the final analysis, it gets signed by the president, then it means it is now fully adopted. So my question of, which I've always given you, that the policy, public policy and politics are bedfellows. This is how they are. So you cannot have a policy which is not talking to those systems that I put up there. So that is at a point of adoption. Now let's move quickly to look at, right, so when you are doing the policy drafting, whatever it is, the process that you must include as many people as possible to input into what you are trying to do. And all policy development processes are intersectoral. You recruit or you include people from different sectors just for purposes of their input into that particular policy. What we are trying to do is to give in inputs which will be able to talk to their respective policies wherever they are. That's why it is there. You can make your own policy on health, for example, right? You don't involve people from education. There will be no input into your health policy that has an implication on health, for example, right? So you have to get people from different sectors to input into that, including legal opinion, for example. You need people from the judiciary and something like that to give you an input into how that policy is going to be, and also the implications of the implementation. You can have a policy which is going to create a lot of trouble for you, right? With a lot of legal issues to meet and get challenged. If you just decide to say, okay, we want to create a very beautiful big city in area 15, right? You just come here and demolish all the houses. People wake up in the morning or at night, the city people are demolishing all the houses. You cry here, nothing goes on, right? You have an implication. Yes, your policy is to build a beautiful city, but you never consulted people, whatever it is. These become legal issues, right? So the legal components within their policy issues or legal section of that action will have to be handled by those guys in that particular field. That's why it is important for people to consult and also to look at policies in that multi-sectoral way. It helps you to address a few issues that may be contentious to how you are going to implement that particular policy. Right, let's move on. Now, I talked about the adoption all the way to cabinet level. I think that is what it is. Now, how do we legitimize? When you adopt it, how is it legitimate? Right? How do you know that now we have adopted the policy? Is it legitimate or not? What does legitimacy mean? When we talk about legitimacy, what does that mean? Huh? What does that mean? Legitimacy. If they say John has an illegitimate child, what does that mean? I know it is very, very obnoxious to say Mutandi an illegitimate child, right? Can a child be illegitimate? More than that? Important? Not quite. Legitimate and illegitimate. What is a legitimate marriage? And I assume all of you are not married, so we don't know what a legitimate marriage is. Okay, something legitimate is something which has been accepted by stakeholders or interested parties, right? If you elope with a boy or a girl and turn that into marriage, people look at that type of arrangement as illegitimate marriage if they have not accepted it. See what? You're living together. Of course, because of human rights issues, we have different terms coming around. Living together, doing whatever it is, but all those things are illegitimate. To me, the system has not accepted what you have done based on the norms of that particular system, the way you are, right? If the two of you have a child by accident or by intention, and your parents don't approve of that, they can say it's an illegitimate child, right? A child out of an acceptable marriage arrangement, something like that. Order? What's cheaper? Okay, yeah, that's the term used in the chair, one chair. But we don't know whether when they say one chile, mnakagura kuchile, or you bought it from where. That we don't know, right? So when we talk about a legitimate policy, it's a policy which has been accepted, right, by partners, by stakeholders, and also it has been accepted and fits into available laws in that particular country. In other ways, it is going to operate without conflicts arising between the implementation of a policy and the laws which are available, right? That becomes legitimate. In other words, there will be no conflict, there will be no trouble, there's no nothing. So a legitimate policy is a policy which has been accepted. And when I say accepted, it will have been accepted throughout the structure that I gave you up there, right? It means all the way up to the presidency, the ministers, the technicians, accepting that this is a policy that is going to give us the desired results. That becomes a legitimate policy. So that is it. So a policy can be seen or assumed to be legitimate if, one, it gives a better chance of being implemented as intended. Right? If it is going to be implemented without any other loopholes around, without any other conflicts around, without much negative outcomes, it means that policy, one, if it is giving you less negative outcomes, then we go back to my first statement. It means it is effective, right? If you are getting more of positive results, it means that policy is effective. And if the general public and the citizens like it, accept it, then it is accepted, right? You remember we looked at our policy formulation based on these two, effectiveness and acceptability. So the legitimacy of a policy is based on its effectiveness and its acceptability by meeting and fulfilling all the requirements as demonstrated earlier on in my framework that I just demonstrated out there. And this one, the legitimacy of a policy is measured by, one, that citizens agree that what the government is doing is good, right? And that what the government is doing actually is meeting public need, right? What the public needs, then it will be legitimate. But if you say, okay, our policy now is that all shorter people should never marry taller women, right, as a policy. because we want shorter people to be shorter people, taller people to be taller people. This would be a very poor policy because people will not accept that, right? There will be no justification. And remember, I mentioned that in a policy, you need evidence, right? Where do you get evidence that if shorter people marry taller people, there'll be problems, or taller people marry whatever it is, there'll be problems, right? You cannot even prove that if a taller person marries a shorter person, then the child will be tall or the child will be short. You may not prove that, right? So there's no evidence, there's no basis for any justification at all. So this would be an illegitimate type of policy, because one will not have no reason to really convince people that it's important or not. Something like that, right? So this is just an example. But all policies must be acceptable by the citizens, the public, and also must agree with what people expect. So it's an expectancy type of, right? The legitimacy of a policy is an expectancy type of relationship between the citizens and their government. And also, that policy must be appropriate for the purpose for which it was intended, right? For which it was intended or for which it was developed for. It must be, it should be able to give that scenario. Then it will be deemed to be legitimate. And also, if the cost of implementation of that policy, the cost of the formulation of that policy is for the greater public good, then it will be legitimate. Otherwise, if you are doing something which is too costly and the benefit the people get out of it are minimal, then it's not necessary, right? It will not be acceptable, it will not be legitimized. And if you check out what we call the cost-benefit analysis, we talked about that last time, right? Yes. What is the benefit that will accrue from the costs that you are putting into the formulation and also implementation of the policy? If these don't balance, then it becomes unnecessary for somebody to come up with that type of policy around. So these are some of the issues that you need to consider. Now, from adoption to legitimization, then it comes in, I guess because that's trouble, comes in the issue of implementation, right? So let's look at implementation. What is policy implementation? Let's look at that. What is policy implementation? I'll give you the, let's see. Okay, let me do something here. All right. Let's look at the policy implementation here. And that's a question. I give you a question. I want that small answer. What is policy implementation? How would it be? Yeah, Joyce is smiling. I think she should give us an answer. Yes. Go ahead. I can't hear you. Implementation to finalize. Yamikan. To? Okay. Roughly, yes. And implementation is practicing. To practice. Put it practice of what you have come up with. Anyway. Policy implementation is that activity in the policy process in which you as actors, developers, or people who formulated the policy attempt to convert that policy intention and resources into action. So in other words, it's putting what you have designed into actual practice. So policy implementation actually is how the whole process must be converted into action. That would be your policy implementation. And one, policy implementation must result into, you are talking, can I help you? Or can you help us share your talking? Okay. But that's what I said. Now you as a reporter to us should have paraphrased it into something shorter. I appreciate your listening skill. It's very fast and quick, exactly how I said it. But for her, it would be easier just to paraphrase it. Make it as short as possible so that she can understand that policy implementation is how you transform your intentions and the resources that are involved in that process into an action. That is all. Right? All that you have designed and planned comes into an action. That's an implementation. And that one, as a process, it must bring about specific outputs. So there must be outputs. Number two, it must also bring out the outcomes. Is an output same as an outcome? We want output and outcomes. Are they the same? Anybody? Hear me going? Is an output same as an outcome? I'm asking you people. Yes. And you know, in the classes where they know me most, things that I don't get as answers are true. A no is never an answer. A yes is never an answer. So they know me very well. If you want to answer my question, never say no or a yes. Then you're in trouble. Because you have to explain why the yes, why the no. Right? These are used interchangeably, right? They're used interchangeably. Let's assume you have planned to prepare sima. See, George, the question would be, why do you want to prepare sima? That's question number one. What would it be? You want to prepare sima. See, George, why? For what purpose? You want to eat. Why do you want to eat? Because you are hungry. So if you eat, what happens? Huh? Okay, so when you are full, what next? You'll be happy, right? Once you are happy, you'll be healthy. Once you are healthy, you'll be productive because you have the energy, right? Now, out of the things that I've mentioned here, right? I say you want to prepare sima. See your jet. And the things that I've mentioned here, are they outcomes or outputs? You are happy, you are full, you are healthy, you are this. Are they outcomes or outputs? Outcome. Why? Results. An outcome is a result. Okay, good. And what is the output out of what I put around as an example? What is the output? When you're preparing a sima, how do you want to come out of your process? The sima, right? Because when you're preparing sima, there will be no sima. Is that a sima? It's just ufa, moto, chan, and the water and the pot. That's not sima. It's a process, right? Now, out of your process, you have only output, right? That output will be what? It's a SIMA. SIMA is your output. Okay. Now, when you have your output, it has some effects into all those things that we mentioned. It's a process. From where you're going to start to think about the SIMA, how you are going to prepare, where you're getting the resources, and what you are getting out of that. And what are the intended, you said the results, right? Let me go on. What are the intended results of that output? Those are the outcomes, right? The happiness, the fullness, the health, the energy, and something like that. But when you look at these things, people confuse them, right? Yes. An output is the first product of what you are coming up with, something like that. An outcome is the benefit which accrues from that output, right? This is how we should be looking at these things. It's very easy to confuse them. I know people have confused them so much. Simple example. You are in the university now, right? It's a process. What do you want to get in the final analysis? What do you want? Yeah? You want a degree, okay? That is your expectation as an output. And the degree is just a name, but the real thing is the paper. Seriously? So the output is a degree in form of a paper. Okay, so after that, what next? There will be unemployment, unhappiness, anxiety, depression, all these things will be the outcomes. You look back at what you have gone through, right? All through. Ask Joyce. 4 a.m. she's up getting ready, which to jump into crossroads and walk to this place and all those things, right? And here your output is there. But what is the outcome of that, right? So this is how we should look at that. So when we are looking at the policy implementation, we look at this. Our output from all those processes is the policy which we have down there, right? And our expectation, which will be our outcomes, are the results that come from the implementation of the objectives or the tasks or the activities. That's clear, Mr. Yamikani, right? Yes. This is how we should look at that. Okay. Now, when we look at this, as much as we have looked at this, we also discover that as much as we look at issues of output and outcomes in the policy implementation processes, you still require certain things. What do you call the capabilities? You require implementation capabilities. What does that mean? NOMSA. What does that mean? Capabilities. What are they? Something that's okay. Something that can enable you to carry out the activity, right? Implement what you're trying to do and something like that. And within the policy assessment, I talked about the throughput analysis, right? Something which I should also have mentioned is the capability analysis, right? Capability analysis, you look at yourself, yes, we can have a policy. What is our capability for implementation, right? What is our capability in terms of resources? What is our capability in terms of the skill, right? In Malawi here, we have beautiful policies of all the countries in the central, you look at Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, whatever it is. Beautiful policies, right? And people know it, and these countries know it. But we are the poorest in terms of implementation. That's what they're talking about. Our capability in implementation is the poorest in this part of Africa, right? Reason? What do you think is the reason? There are so many. Capability in terms of resources, capability in terms of the skilled human resource, right? It's not just anybody who can do everything, right? Do we have people who are skilled enough to implement some of these things around? So here, yes, you can bring in the issue of what you call the capability analysis. It becomes good, and I'm very good at things that I don't put straight to you, put in the notes to come as a question during that day, because I know you'll answer. What is capability analysis in policy implementation or in policy formulation. Beautiful question. Very good question. Short, to the point. Shotgun. Yeah, it's just a shotgun, this one. But what do you